host, Joe Nivering, and tonight we will hear from Rachel Recap about Chapter 3 and Rebecca Rhetoric about the wind. Now to Rachel.
Thank you, Joe. Chapter 3 started out with a description of the dummy that Tabby has always kept beside her bed. Though it appeared a security feature like a guard, Tabby used it to model clothes as she sewed replicas. One dress in particular, a red one, found itself on the dummy many times, while it was only worn by Tabby once, in a play. One night, Owen was sleeping over with Johnny and began to feel a little ill. Johnny sent him to his mother's room, awaiting Owen's scream upon seeing the dummy. As expected, Owen screamed and ran back to Johnny, bringing him to come look at the angel next to Tabby. Upon returning to Tabby's room, the only thing beside the bed was the dummy, but Owen confirms that there was another being beside the bed. Then, Owen climbs into bed per Tabby's command and sleeps until Mrs. Wheelwright comes strolling in, alarming Owen, who believed that she was an angel. She, then startled also, according to Owen, screams like a banshee. Banshee means a spirit wailing because a loved one will soon die. Looking back on the event, Owen is confident that he interrupted the angel of death in its task and became God's servant to complete the task of killing Tabby. The next segment of the chapter discussed the reasons for Tabby and Dan postponing their marriage with a courtship for 4 years. One of those reasons was a disagreement about what church to attend. As a result, they got married in the non-denominational church, Hurd's Church, at Gravesend Academy. The reception after their wedding took place outside of 80 Front Street, the Wheelwrights' home. It was a beautiful and hot day, and everyone enjoyed the celebration until a severe storm blew through, rushing the newlyweds off on their honeymoon. The storm may have been a foreshadowing for Tabby's death. The hail was as hard as a baseball, and when Tabby let Owen into the car, a little piece of hail hit Tabby in the head. If Owen hadn't entered the car, Tabby wouldn't have gotten hit. The final segment describes another event in Hurd's Church, just a few years after the wedding, Tabby's funeral. The chapel was full of different people: Johnny's baseball team and coach, feeling guilty for their contribution to the death, Police Chief Pike, sitting emotionless yet obligated to be there, and Owen, pained by his guilt, were all there. But all the attendees were distracted from the funeral service by the torturous cracks of the bat at the nearby baseball game. Later in the evening, Hester and Johnny take a walk to the cemetery and find Owen praying. He commands them to get in his dad's truck to go to Dan's place to take the dummy in the red dress so that he is not grieved by looking at it. They drive in the back of the truck, relieving their grief together, and at the end of the night, Owen returns home with the dummy. The conclusion of the chapter presents foreshadowing that Johnny has committed some kind of evil. Back to you, Joe. What an interesting chapter. Thanks, Rachel. Now to Rebecca Recap for an analysis of wind. Thank you, Joe. Today, we will take a look at a paragraph found on page 145. "We were off. Faster," Owen shouted once, out in the open road to Rye. It was a fast 8 or 10 miles. Soon the granite dust was gone from the floor of the flatbed, and the only thing to sting our faces was the occasional insect pelting by. Hester's hair was wild. The wind rushed around us too forcefully for us to talk. Sweat instantly dried. Tears, too. The red dress of my mother's dummy clung and flapped in the wind. Owen sat with his back against the cab of the truck, the dummy outstretched in his lap, as if the two of them were engaged in a half-successful levitation experiment. In this passage, Ivering uses very specific words and figurative language to create the image of that truck ride. He uses the wind to represent the sudden interruption caused by Tabby's death. He describes several effects of the event. First, the granite dust is picked up, representing that Mr. and Meany will no longer allow their lower class to hold Owen back from being who he wants to be, as Tabby's wished. Hester returned from her neat self to the crazy girl she used to be with the uncombed hair.
The wind interrupted their usual conversation, much as Tabby's death made Johnny's and Owen's relationship and their communication more difficult. On the other hand, the wind shows some instantaneous relief from the discomfort, like in the drying of their tears. The contrary effects of the wind are apparent in the different motions of the dress, first clinging, then flapping. And Owen's interaction of the dummies seems to describe an attempt to raise Tabby up, to raise her to heaven, to put her in a place he believes she deserves. To sum it up, the wind is more than just an element of nature. Don't forget to look beyond the words. Back to you, Joe. Thanks, Rebecca. That sums it up for this episode. See you next week for a glimpse into the holiday season.